Good afternoon once again, and we meet in our fourth and final session for the first day of the Knowledge Summit 2019. And what is the connection between sustainability and consumption? And how can we raise the awareness of consumers to become effective in sustainable production? These are the points to be discussed in our fourth session of today. And our guests would be Basil Dabbagh, CEO of Agility in Abu Dhabi, Michael Condit, the Executive Director of the Collaborating for Production, and Ibrahim Zabi of the Executive Director of Sustainability in Majid Al Futtaim, and Siram Madhumam, Chief Innovation Officer, and the moderator would be Malik Al-Rifai, the Strategy and Management Consultant.
Welcome to Knowledge Summit 2019, organized by the Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Knowledge Foundation. Knowledge, the path to sustainable development. This session is about sustainable consumption and production. My name is Malik. I am the Director General of Al-Hikmah Management Consultancy. I make my master degree in sustainability management and energy management, and my PhD about sustainable indicators. Our speakers for this day: Engineer Basil Dabbagh, the CEO of Agility Abu Dhabi. He has 20 years of experience in different aspects of business. And we have Mr. Michel and Engineer Sana. In fact, already he present you to the public, so we not return again to the same thing. The agenda of sustainable development adopted by all United Nations countries member in 2015, and the Sustainable Development Goals are the blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. They address the global challenge we face, including those related to poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, peace, and justice. The 17 goals are all interconnected, and in order to leave no one behind, it's important that we achieve them all by 2030. To know more about the goals, or the goal number 12, let me to invite Engineer Serim Mahmoudou to talk about production and consumption working towards goal number 12. Thank you. You can do there.
Sorry, it's here. It's here.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity to be in front of you and share a few thoughts about what we as a company and me personally feel about this entire sustainability. As he was explaining, I'm from Dalsco. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer. I've been a chemical engineer. I've been in this field for more than 25 to 30 years in terms of environmental and sustainability activities. So to just start off, why is sustainability the need of the hour? Because definitely we are taking more than what we have, which today all of us know. Then, if you look at development versus sustainability, Now, in the past 100 years, I think we have come a long way compared to what the human race has been living much before that. So well, and we have been considering ourselves as the most evolved species. Are we really an evolved species? Because along with sustainable development, what we've claimed in this past 100 years, we also completely polluted and made sure that we have been destroying the entire environment and the resources of this world. So just look at this. I do not know how many of you are aware of something called an Earth Overshoot Day, which means this is giving an idea of how much of our resources we are consuming now, which the Earth can regenerate in a year. So we, at this point of time, we are almost consuming 1.7 times more than what we can regenerate in a year. So that's a very alarming situation. For example, last year, if you really look at it, we have already reached the Earth Overshoot Day for 2019 in July, on July 29th, which means by July of this year, we have consumed what we would have, the Earth would have generated for the whole of 2019. If you go back, way back to 1971, you would realize that we had at least 1 year's of consumption versus the production. So this is the alarming rate at which we are trying to plunder this planet. So just another example here. I believe by 2050, the Earth will, the ocean will have more plastic than fish. So all these are really very, very alarming. So then, what is this we are trying to sustain? Of course, there are two types of resources which you see in the Earth. One is your finite and depleting. The other one is your renewable. So if you're looking at the finite and depleting, we know all the mineral resources or other type of natural resources. So as I was mentioning earlier, we are taking more than what we have. And besides that, what we're trying to do is we are using more than what we need, which is causing much more waste. And this is where, as a waste management company in this part of the world, we are, as Dalsco, one of the leading waste management companies, just to give you an idea, we are handling more than 2,500 tons on a daily basis of waste in Dubai city alone, where Dubai is generating more than 6,000 tons. So I would like to just put across some of the points which, as a waste management company, we have been coming across, and where we feel that there could be some value add in terms of sustainable. So if you look at the GCC statistics, you see GCC is actually producing one of the largest per capita waste. If you see 106 million tons is what we're generating per year, and by 2020, by next year, I think 120 million tons is what we are expected to generate. Out of it, 53% is construction waste, and about 33% is the waste which you and I generate, which is called the municipal solid waste, and about 14% is the industrial and other waste. Now let's just look at the country-wise. Again, if you're looking at in this region, KSA and UAE, we stand next to KSA in terms of the generation of the municipal waste. So this 11 million tons of municipal solid waste which we are generating today in this market, we have done some little bit of analysis to find out what does it consume. Of course, the two Emirates here, Dubai and Abu Dhabi, they generate the maximum, followed by the other Emirates which I've shown there. You will notice that almost 45% of this waste which is being generated is something which can be recycled, which means on a yearly basis, we are almost throwing 4 to 5 million tons of resources into the waste, which can always be recovered. So if you look at it, that 45%, paper is about 48%, glass is 30%, plastic is 10%, metal is 5%. So there's a huge opportunity out there to make sure that we are able to conserve this entire impact. If you don't do, what is going to happen? Then naturally, of course, you're going to pollute the local environment, emission, green gases, toxic emissions, groundwater contamination, and all this is a part of the cumulative waste which is falling across the region. Now, this is where, as responsible personnel, there are a lot of opportunities which are there from this challenge. Of course, it involves the public, where everybody has to be conscious in terms of recycling, then ensuring that source segregation gets, then responsible consumerism, which my colleagues will again talk about it later. Then, of course, government will have to encourage and drive these through suitable initiatives. And then, of course, the basic thing is it's not a waste. We are actually, waste is a resource in the wrong place. That's what the whole message should go in. So just to give you some small ideas of how these messages can be driven. So for example, if you know glass, it doesn't decay or anything, it takes millions of years to decompose. If you see, for example, if I'm able to recycle one aluminum can, I can burn a 14 or 12 kilowatt bulb for almost 20 hours. So you can imagine the amount of energy. One aluminum can is just 13 grams of aluminum. That's because that's the amount of energy you would have otherwise spent for producing aluminum from the raw ore of bauxite. Similarly, if you recycle a ton of paper, I'm saving almost 17 trees, because again, 1 ton of paper is produced by cutting down almost 17 trees. Similarly, if I'm recycling 1 ton of plastic, I'm going to save about 5,000 kilowatt hour power. So we, from our company, when you're looking at a regional perspective, we did start working on it along with the municipalities in the past 4 to 5 years. From 2014, the municipality in Dubai has started something called a My City, My Environment program, where they've been encouraging residents to get involved. And we have found that there's been a lot of interest and awareness, because one thing which is very encouraging for companies like is the public participation. So from, let's say from 0% today, we are able to achieve at least 22% of recovery of these recyclables, which is quite a good growth in terms of what the region or this place is aiming to achieve at. And of course, the government legislations also talk about ensuring 75% waste diversion away from landfills by 2021. So all these definitely would lead to that, in that direction. So when you're coming to the production cycle sustainability, as we were again talking about, all these products which we're getting from these waste resources, in terms of whether it's plastic or paper or cans or glass, all these can definitely be recycled. And there are also different ways to ensure that you're able to bring it back into the mainstream. Recycling reverse vending machine is just an example which I've stated here. And then the next thing, again, in this particular, is looking at lower impact and longer life products. Now, this is something which, interestingly, we have done some exercises earlier, for example, with the chamber and the dairy industry. See, there was one particular problem which the dairy people faced here, in the sense that they were generating a lot of shelf rejects on a daily basis, which then need to be treated more than 70, 75 tons. While discussing it, one of the things which came up is, I'm sure that most of you would have noticed, you go to a supermarket, you will see a date of manufacture and a date of expiry in every product. So what people do is they look at it, okay, maybe it's manufactured today, but its expiry date is 4 days from now. Something is manufactured yesterday, its expiry date is another 2-3 days down the line. But you would look at what is manufactured today, you pick that up, and you keep leaving the other one on the shelf, so it extends, and then finally, it expires and it gets thrown into the garbage. So the best thing is, why do you put the date of manufacture? Just say best before. So anything best before a particular date, it doesn't matter whether it's manufactured today or yesterday or tomorrow, as long as it is best before a particular date. That can reduce the wastage. These are simple things. Similarly, if you look at, when you go to a supermarket, you'll find, people announcing various things like, these schemes, where they try to wrap something around it, again with plastic. Why do you do that? You just announce, if you take one, you can go and pick up another free. Why do you need to wrap everything together? So it's over-packaging. There's a lot of over-packaging which goes on in the region. Similarly, of course, single-use plastics, which I'm sure that most of us would have come across. When you order food, it's a simple example from any of the online deliveries. They send the whole food with all sorts of disposable knife and fork. It's coming to your home. Why do you need all that? I'm sure that most of you just take it and throw it into the dustbin. So it's going back into the waste stream. So it's not required. So we need to look at where we can avoid, how we can avoid all this, and the same thing in the supermarkets in terms of your bags, reusable bags, instead of, the plastic bags which are being used. So one of the things, of course, Dubai is today leading, in trying to look at the region in terms of how to encourage recycling, recovery, and all that. And Expo has also been used as a forum where we're trying to drive this whole concept. So we are partnered with Expo also, and we're trying to ensure that 85% of the waste which is generated in the Expo has to be diverted away from landfill. So we're trying to look at how specific technologies can be adopted to ensure that these are all brought back into the mainstream or we recycle and recover. So this is in terms of the finite resources. Now, there are a lot of renewable resources. So that's another area where everybody has to focus upon. So you can shift the energy production from fossil fuels to solar, wind, alternative energy sources. Then agricultural residue, farm residue, other type of organic waste where you can produce biogas to power, and again, decentralized production methods. So there are plenty of technologies out there which we definitely need to adopt to ensure that we start reducing the ravage of the natural resources. So this is one area where I think, if you look at this particular industry, everybody is responsible for this. One is, of course, the individuals, we as individuals, where we need to make sure that we have refuse, where there's a waste, reduce, repurpose, recycle, rethink our lifestyle choices to make it more sustainable. Of course, government supporting with all the initiatives and incentives, and companies, again, who have to take sustainable approach, value chain initiatives, and all these sort of things. So that's the whole thing, because as the speaker earlier had mentioned, all these sustainable development goals of UNDP. Now, together, I'm 100% sure that if you all put in these efforts, we can achieve, because otherwise, I think we are going to leave a dead earth to our future generations. Thank you.
Sustainable consumption doesn't mean to consume less or to stop consumption. It means the consumption has to be differently and efficiently. In this context, Mr. Michel will talk about applying sustainable consumption. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Happy to be here and to look a little bit what you saw also on the last slide, from the individual action to the governmental action to basically also the business action. In the notion of sustainable well-being, I think we all want to be well, we want to have a good life, but the question was already posted, if we consider climate change, if we consider loss of biodiversity, and many other more factors, how can we? But before I go there, I have a question to you. Just judge yourself, pick one of those, choose one or two, which you think fit to you. Or maybe you take F and you say you are completely rational. I don't know how you feel, but often if you look on those things, we know they are not healthy. We know we should wake up if the alarm is going on. But actually, if we look, and that's also true on sustainability, often we design things as if we feel people are totally rational. But we know often if you go shopping or anything else, we are quite irrational in the things we do. So that's why I think it's important, if we look on sustainability, we need to understand this irrationality about ourselves. Even sometimes in business decision making or in government, it might be not always so rational about the decisions which are taken. But of course, we are all having a different starting point. If we look on our own consumption patterns, and we did this work with the World Business Council and the World Economic Forum, we find out we have different footprints on CO2 emission, or this showcases here the footprint in terms of resource material consumption. No matter where you are globally, there are top 3 things leading our material and CO2 footprint. They're about the built environment we are in, housing, they're about mobility, and they're about food patterns. So if we want to design a more sustainable planet, how can we design it? How can we create business models, services, policies that enable citizen and consumer to be more sustainable? I cannot live sustainable in an unsustainable infrastructure. So if people ask me to take public transport and there's no good public transport, it will be difficult for me. If people talk about sustainable buildings and housing, but it's very hard to buy a sustainable flat, it will be very hard for me to lower my footprint? And that's how the interplay comes, as we just saw. Business and government can play together with consumers and citizens to lower our footprint. So it's still about decoupling. It's still we want to be more happy, we want to have a good life, we want to have well-being and life satisfaction, but we need to find smarter ways of doing things. Smarter ways to lower our CO2 emission and our material footprint. And how can they look like? Can we use technologies to be smarter? Can we maybe do things very differently? And I will give you an example. Or can we maybe even rethink the system to be more smarter? So let me give some quick ideas on the different things I just posted. On technologies. Of course, we are living in a digital age, and the question is, can ICT, can digitalization with a purpose help us to be more sustainable? We work currently on interesting projects like food waste and artificial intelligence. So we are trying to use big data to connect those who are producing food waste, canteens, restaurants, or even individual homes, to connect those who maybe don't have enough living to get access to food waste. Just one example. Or let's take the other example of smart metering. We know we had another session this morning, the keynote in the morning, and we heard per square meter probably we still consume too much energy. Doesn't matter renewable or non-renewable at home. And how can we be more smarter? And we are testing those kind of approaches, and we are also advising policymakers on how to take this up, behavior insights. Does it help only to have the device measuring energy consumption at home? Or maybe you need to display also how your neighbors are consuming energy in order to make something in your brain happen. And actually what we find, information in itself is not enough, pure information, but if you compete with neighbors and actually if it's displayed to you, then something might change in your brain. Or let's take the notion of personalized food. We know we eat unhealthy most of the times. So can technology help us to find more smart innovation, but also more smart products? Of course, for this, also from a sustainability perspective, maybe we have to understand what smart products are out there. So do we find more sustainable products which are in the food system already produced? And why I'm hinting for this is, I think we have to even rethink food. Currently, we are quite based on meat in most countries. If you look from a footprint perspective, meat is a heavy load on our own footprint. What about plant-based alternatives? And would we like them? Would we say, oh, that doesn't taste good to me? Have you tried them? What about actually circular food? Really trying to get closed-loop systems like aquaponica or many other systems, peaponic, which are out there, to produce even new food patterns. And would I like it as a consumer? Would I understand it before I've tried it? We have used behavior change in different settings. We have looked, for example, in a canteen together with Greenpeace and academic partner, if we go in a canteen and it's mainly meat-based canteen, there's a small alternative on plant-based, what people buy in a canteen. And we found actually, at the moment we started there, that more meat-based stuff was sold. And then we changed a lot of patterns. We changed the price, we changed the information, we changed the light, because the light in the canteen was made that meat looks good, but plant-based stuff looked very ugly. So you even had to work with the guys designing the light in the canteen. And we found out with behavior change tools, we changed towards more plant-based uptake of menus rapidly. Actually, within the first month, 20% of months, within the first month, 20% more sales of plant-based alternatives. The second week, it was 30%, and it stayed on for quite a long time, so we also observed this over a period of 3 years. So there are ways of doing things differently, and they resonate with the consumer if done well. You remember I also said, let's look in maybe changing the system, and we had this in the presentation before. We are still living in a very linear economy. We produce stuff, we use them, and we throw them away. We just had the perfect presentation before. What if we rethink the stuff, if we cycle more, if we reuse more, if we replace it, if we share? There's huge opportunities also on my own footprint if I look into those opportunities according to it. What we are driving at the moment in Europe with the European Commission is an Action Inside Club. Again, we feel there's a lot of discussion on circularity, but the citizen and the consumer are not part of the discussion. So we created a kind of panel. We look into textiles, plastics, and electronics with major companies. And we try to understand what are the circumstances consumers are engaging on circularity. When would they reuse a mobile phone? Most are hoarding mobile phones at home because the current business model is get a new one after 2 years, even so it's still perfectly working. And we managed actually with one telecom provider now, if you renew your tariff, you can buy a reused phone. And it still has a guarantee of 2 years. So you don't lose, even if you buy a reused product, the guarantee. Or we're looking on textiles with major brands like Gucci on sharing textiles and leasing textiles. How interesting if you buy a luxurious brand and you don't purchase it, but you lease it with a certain tariff as well. And what about plastics? You heard about the plastic bottles and many problems which are related there. So how even can we create unpackaged products, and would this work as well? So in general, it's all about creating insights, how consumers respond to certain ideas, but then also to use behavior change tools, which are multiple. You can nudge, you can do choice design, you can do choice editing. You can change the business model and engage the consumer differently on a more service model. It's not too complicated. There are simple steps to go if you want to prototype on behavior change. I don't go into all of this, but it needs to be at the right time, at the right place, where the consumer is engaging with the product. It needs to be fun, not too dry, ideally. It needs to be collaborative, that both feel they gain something out of it, the consumer and the business. And in general, I think if we look into those, there's more to explore for business and policymaker to design business strategies or policy approaches based on consumer behavior insights, and let's discuss later in the panel discussion. Thanks.
Product life cycle. Product life cycle is the core study for achieving sustainable production. Not on? No. Okay. Product life cycle is the core of study for achieving sustainable production. Now, in this context, Engineer Bassel Al-Dabbagh will talk about ensuring supply chain sustainability from a logistic perspective. Please.
Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So I work for a global logistics and transport company, and I'm going to be tackling the subject of sustainability from a supply chain perspective. Now, a little disclaimer, I have 2 young daughters, and when I try to explain to them what is transport and logistics, they're not interested. They are interested by YouTubers and Instagrammers much more than what I do, although I'm passionate about it, and hopefully I managed to interest you a little bit more than I managed to interest my daughters today. All right. So at Agility, the company I work for, we have a number of sustainability projects that touch several areas: environmental, social, economic topics. But today I'm going to focus more on the topic where we can make the most impact, where we have opportunity to do the most impact on sustainability. And this is the reducing of the greenhouse gas emissions. First, I will start by a glimpse of how the industry as a whole is responding to sustainability. going to start with the maritime industry. And the International Maritime Organization has set a goal to reduce emissions by at least 50% by 2050. And the baseline for this is the 2008 emissions. So by the current estimations, this is already 80% of reduction of what we are emitting today. So that's an ambitious goal. So how to achieve this ambitious goal? There are a number of initiatives that the International Maritime Organization started to try to achieve this goal. The graphic here shows various methods and techniques that can be employed to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. From that, I mentioned, first, the IMO is taking steps to strengthen the energy efficiency design, basically the design of the vessels to make them more efficient and reduce the emissions. It's also establishing a multi-donor trust fund for greenhouse gas emissions reduction. This is basically to fund the efforts to support the GHG emissions. Also, there is a big push to use alternative fuels and more sustainable fuels that have low carbon emissions, and other initiatives like the slow steaming of vessels that we know consume less fuels and thus reduce the emissions. Moving to the air freight industry, well, also they've set ambitious goals. The International Civil Aviation Organization, or ICAO, has set a goal to be carbon neutral growth from 2020 onwards, meaning all the growth in emissions from 2020 onwards has to be compensated. But how to be compensated? Again, there is a number of initiatives, starting from improved aircraft technology. So, the age and design of the plane, as well as the routes that the planes take, impact a lot of the fuel usage and, of course, the corresponding emissions. The use of sustainable fuel, like in the maritime industry, again, the use of different type of fuels and biofuels that can be, some fuels are 50% more efficient and have less emissions. The challenge here is how to commercialize these fuels and make them more commercially viable. And this is what takes me to the last initiative, which is CORSIA. CORSIA stands for the Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation. It is designed to be an economic measure to achieve carbon neutral growth. First, it starts since January 2019. There is companies are required to report their emissions. It starts by the reporting. And then from 2027 onwards, they'll be the requirement to reduce the emission will be mandatory. So this is how the air freight industry is responding to sustainability. If we move to the road freight, there is big opportunities, but also big challenges. Among the opportunities, lower carbon fuels are already commercially available. And not only that, now we are looking at electric trucks and the commercialization of electric trucks. There are some pilots out there, but they are not still fully commercially viable. And there is a lot of push on that front to make them more commercially viable. But also, other than lower carbon fuels and electric trucks, we can reduce the emissions with the existing trucks. How to do that? A big consumption goes to the empty backhauls. A lot of the trucks goes empty on the backhaul. As a matter of fact, in certain countries, more than the 40% of the trucks that you see on the road are empty. And so through the digital platforms that matches the demands from different places, we can ensure that all the trucks or most of the truck trips are fully loaded and thus reduce the empty truck holes and reduce the emissions. Now, how about the challenges? If we look at the challenges, they are not easy. First, how to deploy the infrastructure for refueling with the different type of fuels, not the regular gas stations, but refueling with the new fuels, or how to charge for the electric trucks. And as you know, the infrastructure deployment is expensive, needs regulation, and is not easy. So that's one challenge. The other challenge is that the road freight industry, as opposed to the airline industry and the maritime industry, is highly fragmented. It is mostly smaller players. You know, in any given country, you may find thousands of road freight transporters, while you will find a handful of airline transporters or maritime transporters. So the challenge becomes more difficult to have widespread adoption. All right, now I want to, it's really worth noting about the UAE as a regional environment leader. Frankly, the UAE was the first GCC state to introduce ultra-low sulfur diesel, also known as Euro 5 diesel. The UAE has done a number of initiatives where it was the leader in the region. Some of them are noted here, and you can see them. For example, part of the Abu Dhabi 2030 plan was the Abu Dhabi 2030 vision was the environment vision. And inside this vision was a lot of sustainability initiatives to make sure that the UAE is on the path of sustainability. Another example is from 2018 onwards, all imported trucks must be Euro 4+. The Euro 4 engines consume less fuel and have lower emissions. On another front, aside from transport, there is the Istidama Sustainable Development Initiative with a Pearl rating system for building. Now, all new buildings should have a minimum requirement that meets the Istidama, and these are sustainability requirements. And for government-funded buildings, they should meet a more stringent requirement and be more sustainable. So this is also an area adopted by the UAE. On the waste management side, there is mandatory waste reporting that started with the aim to divert 85% of municipal solid waste that my colleague Madhu talked about, to divert this waste from the landfill or away from the landfill. Okay. So now that I've covered the industry response, I want to talk about a few initiatives that my company is taking on sustainability. We have a three-pronged strategy to look at emissions. Of course, sustainability is wide, and there are a number of sustainability initiatives that we have, but when we look at emissions, we look at three areas. First is addressing what we call the supply chain emissions, and these are the emissions that come from our customer shipments that we move, so from the cargo that we move for our customers. And this is frankly over 90% of the total emissions that we have as a company. The second part is looking at our own emissions, the emissions that comes from our trucks or from operating our assets like our warehouses and so on and so forth. And the third part of our strategy is investing in innovation that helps sustainability and helps in reducing the emissions. So just to give you an idea, the cargo that we move for our customers is responsible for the emissions of 7.2 million metric tons of CO2 or CO2 equivalent. And they are broken down, as you can see on the slide, between air, ocean, and road. It is the equivalent of around 2 coal-fired power plants in 1 year, the emissions of 2 coal power plants. So what do we do to reduce these emissions? How do we go about it? We work with our customers in a number of areas. First, cargo consolidation. Cargo consolidation is very important. When you consolidate your goods from different origins around the world and you're moving them to a certain destination, you can reduce the number of your shipments and therefore the emissions. For one customer, we reduced 652 tons of CO2 only by doing the consolidation for one move. So that's a big number. And we do that, we roll it out for most of our customers. Another area we work with our customers is the network rationalization. If you see on the slide, I hope it's clear, this is the map of France, and you can see the top where it is really a mess. These are the different supply centers and the different distribution centers. And basically, our customer had different suppliers supplying different distribution or delivery points, and the map looked messy like that. When we rationalize the network, it looks a little bit more organized, like the map on below. where we reduce the transportation trips, and we actually managed to reduce the distance traveled by 22%, thus saving 1,000 tons of CO2 or CO2 equivalent. Air freight densification is a third area we look at, and this is also about reducing the weight of the shipments by also some consolidation or different packaging to make the air freight less weight, and also reducing, we managed to reduce the emissions by more than 9%. Another area is carton recycling. We reuse the cartons, and also we saved over $100,000 only on one shipment by reusing the cartons. So all of these areas add up, and really it's a different approach. It's a different lifestyle for us. For us, it's business to business. We're not talking about consumer lifestyle, but business lifestyle and how we approach things. Now, looking at our own emissions, you can see our own emissions is much smaller compared to the emissions of the cargo that we move for our customers. It is 200,000 metric tons. It is only 5% of one coal power plant. So how do we go about reducing it? Still, even if it's small, we look at reducing it. One of the areas is the green warehouse design. We operate numerous warehouses around the world, and now we are designing our warehouses in a much more sustainable way. You can see some of the features of our new warehouses. So we source building materials regionally as opposed to sourcing them from halfway across the globe, which reduces the emissions. We use sandwich panel for roof insulation, thus using less cooling power. We use LED lighting. We use solar panels. We use electric forklifts. We recycle all the material used in the warehouse. And for the landscaping, we use particular plants, the drought-tolerant plants that also needs a lot of water consumption. Does not require a lot of water consumption. We also use more efficient trucks. As a matter of fact, as part of the upgrade of our fleet, we purchased Euro 5 trucks that are much more efficient. They use 5 to 10% less fuel, and they emit less than the older generation engines. And we are also at the pilot of modification. It's a non-engine modification, but it is used to reduce the emissions of the engine as well. Now, how do you use technology to wrap up? We also use technology, and we focus on technology to help us in our sustainability initiatives. We have a resource consumption app. This app really tracks all the consumption that we have, whether electricity, fuel, or water, because the first thing is to report and to log what you're consuming to know how to reduce it. We also have a very interesting tool. It's a supplier management tool. It tracks the track record of our suppliers. And now we choose our suppliers not only by their cost, but by also how green they are, so that our supply chain becomes more sustainable. And also we have an app. You can see here we have an app that allows our customers to track their CO2 emissions of their own shipments. And by making them aware of their emissions, that's already a big step. Today, when we send our quotes to our customers, we do not only, in the past, we used to put the cost and the time of how long it's going to take to move from point A to point B. Today, we put the cost, we put the time, but we also put the CO2 emissions. And we give them options, and now they can choose among different options, and hopefully, with awareness, they will choose more and more the less emitting option as a solution to move their cargo. Finally, we do also investments outside of our core business in companies that are sustainable and responsible. These are mostly startup companies. As an example, we invested in a company called CargoX. This company is in Brazil, and it's a road freight booking platform, and it reduced the proportion of trucks traveling empty, as I mentioned earlier. Another company we invested in, Hyliion, is in the US. It recycles the energy coming from braking and stores it in a battery for use to support the engine, and it can reduce the fuel usage by up to 30% in certain cases. The last one, or the last example, is a company that produces solar panels, and we use these solar panels on top of our warehouses or in several of our warehouses. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
In this topic, actually, there is the most important to understand that the sustainability, it's a matter for all the Homo sapiens, for all the nations, for all the people in the world. And it will never succeed if we don't take care for the pattern of consumption and lifestyle and the production itself. But there is a point which is actually in the world. It is the engagement and involvement of the government and the society, the stakeholders, especially in the pattern of consumption. The main problem actually we find some countries, and this is through my research in my doctorate, some countries, their economy based on consumption. They are encouraging the consumption, like USA. They are spending the money which they don't own, mostly it's from loans, from the banks, for the things that they don't need. They are just piling things, okay, for a little of happiness which is not enduring. Other countries, small countries in developing country, like Philippines, their economy based on the consumption. So we need really involving of the government. We are not talking, UAE, it's the leader in the area for the sustainability. But really the people who is inviting for the agenda for the sustainability, they are not implemented, and really this is issue. And the question here raised always, how we change the consumption patterns or the lifestyle of people. Mr. Michel, you may tell us how we could change this for the people, the culture.
Well, don't expect one golden bullet point now or a list of 3 and then the problem is solved. I think we saw very interesting presentations right now. So production and consumption goes hand in hand. I see it as a flip of the coin. So we cannot consume sustainable if we are in an unsustainable infrastructure, if we don't have sustainable products. That's one. And of course, I was working in different countries like, for example, Bhutan, which has the gross national happiness as an equation. But I also was working, and I helped the Chinese government to create its sustainable consumption strategy. And of course, business models behind might be quite different. So the question in China we had, yes, we have growth in terms of consumption, but how can we cure with all the issues the side effects of consumption? Because as you know, China is quite a number of people, quite a number of new people wanting to consume differently, throwing away the old traditions, going for the new traditions, let's say, or the new avenues. And with this, creating all the wastes, the issues with CO2 emission. So how do you inspire people to change? I gave in my presentation different hints, but it's quite complex because you need to be specific. Food works differently than housing, than mobility. In mobility, you hear different stories at the moment. You hear public transport, you hear alternative fuel system, fuel like electric cars or hydrogen cars. So it's a combination of different things which we still need to inspire, and their government plays also a role. If we go for food, I think in most countries we have an unsustainable diet. I'm not so sure about this country, but probably you're joining the club with an unsustainable diet. But have we really thought from a CO2 perspective, nutrition? I work a lot with Nestle, and they say themselves the next big thing will be a climate-friendly diet. And now again, we need to rethink the whole system. So we have never thought about food as a climate-friendly diet system. And again, we need governments and we need business doing innovations.
All the stakeholders.
And last one, maybe just the role of technology. Last week I worked with major IT companies looking on digitalization with purpose. I still think, because the elephant of technology is also in the room in different session, I still think we need technologies, but let's look also how technologies can support a sustainable lifestyle. And if you do so, if you ask this question, you come to different solutions for technologies than if you just follow a growth model by nature.
Thank you. Well, it's coming to my mind a question always. Why we are not able to change the culture of people for the pattern of consumption? Which is, if I come to you, as he is telling his daughters to buy something for the sustainable item, and they are rejecting the idea. And I believe the point we fail, or most of the strategy fail, because they are targeting the behavior, the habits. Okay, buy sustainable thing. For what? I believe if we change the mind to not targeting the habits or the behavior, we could make something. Because the behavior, it's the surface point that we can see from the iceberg. The bottom we cannot see. It is the beliefs and the values. And to make the people to change their beliefs and values, you have to make a story. A story. If I come to tell you every day, change the habit, it's not good for cigarette. Not good for smoking. You have to stop cigarette. You will never hear to me. You will tell I am enjoying it. But if you attach it to a story, this is, for example, to the religion. It's prohibited because of this, of that. I create a story. I believe right now, our own problem, it is we are not able to create a story to change the culture towards sustainability. Of course, there is a lot to talk about how to change the culture and sustainability. But as we started this session, that consumption and production, it's like two faces for the same currency. From one hand, we talk about the sustainability, the consumption, and the production now. Part of it, it is the supply chain. And the supply chain, there is the most important in it. There is two main factors in the supply chain, which is the logistics. And in logistics, there is the CO2 emissions and the energy efficiency. So let us to ask Engineer Basil how we could reduce really the emission of CO2.
Yes. So there are the obvious way of possibly convincing your customer to move their cargo by ocean as opposed to air, because it consumes, it emits much less, or to use rail as opposed to trucking, because also it emits much less. There is this way of going about it. But when it's not possible, what's very important is to track and report your emissions and your customers' emissions. And this is what we're doing now. And we are showing our customers how much they're emitting. Before you can reduce, you have to know your level. And then you can target some objectives of having a 5% reduction or a 10% reduction, and so on and so forth. Another way we're going about it is for our own suppliers to ensure the sustainability across the supply chain. We look at our suppliers and we track their emissions. And we use part of the criteria of the selection of the supplier is the supplier that has less emissions. Of course, cost is a main criteria, but now we are looking at also their emissions as another criteria. And so this is to push the reduction not only for our own direct emissions, but the emissions of our customers and the emissions of our suppliers.
Thank you. With the golden rules of reduce, reuse, and recycle, we can, Engineer Modu, you can tell us, is it costly to shift to these principles, to implement it, I mean, and to make it as a part of our life?
Now, as you rightly said, reduce, reuse, recycle. Okay. Now, who does reduction? We have to do it ourselves. So all these three elements of this particular aspect of sustainability starts at home, which means there has to be a conviction on every individual that yes, I am responsible to the society and I am responsible for what is happening in this earth. So the first thing is, and how do we achieve this? That is by education. If you really look at what's happening today, maybe the current generation, if you look, the children are much more aware of all these environmental issues or in terms of recycling. It's very easy for us to convince them and make them change that, their entire behavioral pattern. Whereas if you look at the older generation, we keep talking about it, but we never implement. I will give you typical examples from a waste management perspective as a company who's been handling this. We keep talking about reduction, recycling in all these forums and everything. But let's be honest about it. Where does it start in a house? It starts in the kitchen. How do you sort your waste? So what happens is, the people who, most of the houses, let's say in Dubai, they have a maid. So what we had to do was, while we do all this talking, we had to incentivize those maids. We had to give this entire concept driven right up to that lowest level, where the waste is physically being looked at, segregated, and then taken care of. So we started encouraging competitions between households, between the household maids, and we used to make surprise visits to those houses, give them, of course the municipality also supported us. And it was very interesting to see. I still remember in 2014 when we started this in the Jumeirah area of Dubai, we could hardly get 1 ton of recyclables from, let's say, about 7,000 houses. Though we put 2 bins and we were telling people, you put recyclables in one, you put general waste in the other. But today, I mean, from that same area, we're getting more than 50, 60 tons a day. So there's a huge, growth in awareness. So primarily, everything should start at home. And I think it's all individual driven. Yes, to some extent, you can always enforce. Even enforcement will not work. Let's look at, you go to the airports, you've seen all these, recycling bins which are put there, put cans here, put paper here. You open and see, and I'm 100% sure everything will have the same stuff. So,
By the way, Mr. Engineer, in Europe, if you don't separate the garbage by yourself, you pay fine, you pay penalty.
Yes, so that's the thing. So, of course, penalizing.
Some countries.
Yes, penalizing is one aspect of it. Or it's like, the penalty comes in terms of very high tipping fees for you to dispose of. Okay, in this part of the world, it's been done almost free for the people. That's why there's been a lot of wastage. But here also, the tipping fees are coming. So it's a question of carrot and stick. You have a deterrent at one side where you try to start asking people that you, like as a polluter, you have to pay. The other side is incentivize. Now, encourage recycling. Start rewarding people who are doing this and try to give some, because at the end of the day, the human nature is what is in it for me. So they try to look at, okay, I benefit, so I'm going to do it. So that's the only way. So you will have to have all the three-pronged approach to see if this has to succeed.
Thank you. Now let us open the door for questions from the audience. If anyone would like to ask, please, you can stand up, your name, where you are working, and your question, please. Or there is no mic here.
The mic is coming.
Mic is coming.
Can you see me without me standing up?
Please, I prefer you stand up.
I'll stand up. Okay. So my name is Fatma. I'm a fresh graduate, so no work here. I am a fresh psychology graduate, and so I love it when I get to hear any of the panelists, whether here or other places, mention psychological studies. But my question to you, so I appreciate you for doing that, thank you. But my question to all of you is, where do you think more psychological studies can fit into your each individual companies? How could you benefit from them? or benefit
like to
from
answer?
changing the pattern of consumption behavior through studying it?
Well, somehow it's part of our DNA in the meantime. I still think it needs translation for us, because I have behavior scientists in my organization, but of course we want to change policy making or business strategies, accepting those behavior scientists. And if you look in business or in policy, especially in business, they might end up in the marketing department, but they are not always connected to the sustainability department. So what we are trying to do is to connect those guys. And let's take the footprint picture I showed at the beginning. So probably my own footprint, to talk about it, it's something like 80 tons of stuff I take every year. Imagine 80 tons. It's quite something to ship via logistics. And the question was then with different companies, and let's imagine you have in the room Apple, Unilever, Volkswagen, telecom companies. What can you do about lowering my footprint? And how can you engage understanding the psychology of consumers wanting more, but maybe with less stuff? So you still get more, but you own less. And asking those questions are quite provoking in a way, because it feels right away as a threat to business sometimes, that they are used to sell a lot of resources, but there's an opportunity to sell more services, to sell more non-material stuff, to sell more experience, to sell more data stuff nowadays, to sell maybe some more experience via smart metering or other devices. And at least we try to engage in this conversation. Same we do with policy making. As I just said, on circular economy, we felt, well, talking about closing the loop, there's often a technical discussion. It's an issue of a technology solving closing the loop. Yeah, but if you don't get back the mobile phones because people hold them at home, or if you don't get back the textiles because I have not been used to really engage in leasing a jeans, and I'm afraid of hygiene maybe, then somebody again needs to be told, and maybe also there's a room for policymakers to understand the psychology. So it's again about translation, engagement, and prototyping. Really with policymaker prototyping and a behavior change experiment in order to maybe influence policymaking, taking this perspective also on board.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, let's say, answering your question on the psychological mindset of how that would affect industries like us. See, when you look at a society like Dubai, it's a cauldron of about 150 nationalities. Okay. Now we are talking about sustainability. We are talking about recycling initiatives and all these things. So it's just not possible to just cut and paste what is being practiced. Let's say in Europe, okay, Europe they're doing 5 bins, 4 bins, 3 bins. So let's put it and start off. You can't expect people to immediately change over, because it all depends upon from which part of the world they're coming here and they're staying here. It depends upon what has been ingrained into their system or back home. So we have seen that behavior in, let's say, when we put this recycling facilities in certain parts of Dubai where more people from the West stay. We don't need to do much of training because they're already used to ask for more. Whereas, let's say in some other areas where people are from the subcontinent or from other parts where there's been not too much of, at least earlier, impact on sorting and all that, you will find everything is thrown around the same thing. So it's a question of how and what is the audience. Again, in terms of your consumerism, because at the end of the day, all your entire marketing efforts, I mean, everybody is driving the whole thing only to enhance the consumption. But nobody is also at the same time giving the right message, what is a sort of a responsible consumption. Just to give you an example, how a very strong messaging can have an impact. Let's say about 15, 20 years back, smoking was supposed to be an in thing. Like, if you don't smoke, you're not considered a man. But today, people are scared to pick up a cigarette packet because they see all those gory figures on it, because it sort of gives a very negative impact. So you have created a sort of an impact on the society where people have started changing that behavioral pattern. So the same thing should happen when we are trying to sell, any product. Like, okay, I can do all these things. I'm doing this packaging. Like the same packaging can say, I mean, can you not pick it up in a cloth bag or something like that? I could provide the same thing in an open container. You can pick up whatever you want in a recyclable. So these messages have to also go into these products which are being packaged or which are being taken. But that's up to the industry to see, because it would affect their business. So it's a question of total involvement of the entire system to see how we change it. Otherwise, we are going to suffer as a total population.
Finally, thank you for attending this conversation. We can't even talk after this because our time finished, but we can't even talk after. Thanks for attending this summit, and I hope it adding to you new information about sustainability and consumption and production at the same time. Thank you again, and see you in next summit. Thank you.
Thank you.